They say the worst betrayals come from the ones you trust the most. For years, I thought I was building a perfect life, a loving marriage, 2 incredible kids, and a future full of promise. But everything crumbled when my wife, Sue, turned our home into a battleground. She didn't just betray me. She flaunted her infidelity in ways that left me humiliated, broken, and searching for answers. That's when I realized I couldn't let her destroy me. With the help of an old friend, I devised a plan, not for revenge, but for justice. What followed was a whirlwind of secrets, stings, and shocking revelations that changed my life forever. You won't believe how it all ends. I stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, while Sue's voice dripped with contempt. "You'll just have to deal with it," she spat, her tone sharper than the shards of my shattered pride. She wasn't hiding it anymore. Leroy, her so-called business associate, had taken my seat at the dinner table and my place in her life. Each passing moment felt like a cruel performance, a humiliation designed to erode what little dignity I had left. But even as the walls closed in, a spark of resolve flickered in the depths of my soul. It wasn't much, just a quiet whisper. "Not like this." At night, I stared at the ceiling, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a heavy quilt. My mind replayed her words, her sneers, the smug grin Leroy wore like a badge of conquest. I felt like a stranger in my own home, relegated to the shadows while Sue and Leroy paraded their audacity. My sons, my anchor in this storm, deserved better than this chaos. That whisper of defiance grew louder, threading through the anger and hurt. Slowly, I began to see what had to be done, though the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. I started small, keeping my anger on a tight leash, playing the part of the docile husband. Every dismissive comment Sue hurled my way only added fuel to a growing fire she couldn't see. I needed time, patience, and a plan. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about reclaiming my life and protecting my boys from the fallout of her recklessness. And though I couldn't predict where this would lead, I knew one thing for sure. The man I was yesterday was gone, replaced by someone who wouldn't go quietly. My family's wealth was the kind that spoke for itself. Sprawling estates, glossy cars, and a last name that carried weight in every corner of the county. But behind the polished facade was an emptiness that no amount of privilege could fill. Growing up, I learned early on that money couldn't buy connection. My parents were too consumed by their own lives to notice the boy who craved their attention. I think that's why I clung so tightly to Sue when I met her. She wasn't just a partner. She was my chance at building the family I always dreamed of. But dreams have a funny way of turning on you. In hindsight, I see how my naivety played into Sue's hands. I was the golden goose, a man so eager to love that I ignored the warning signs. Her charm, so captivating at first, came with sharp edges I failed to see. Still, I gave her everything, my trust, my name, my heart. I poured myself into our family, hoping that what I lacked growing up, I could give to my children. Yet, with each passing year, I began to feel the cracks beneath the surface of our life together. Even now, I wrestle with the irony of it all. For all my wealth, I couldn't buy loyalty or safeguard my home from the chaos she brought. But there's a lesson in that, isn't there? It's not about the size of the empire you build, but the strength of the foundation beneath it. And though mine had crumbled, I wasn't ready to let the rubble define me. I was ready to fight. Not for the riches, but for the peace and legacy my sons deserved. When I first met Sue, it was like stepping into a dream. She was magnetic, sharp-witted, beautiful, and full of life. I was the quiet one, content with stability and routine. But she swept me off my feet, pulling me into her whirlwind. Our wedding day felt like the culmination of every romantic cliché I'd ever dared to believe in. People said we looked like the perfect couple, and for a while, I believed it. She made me feel invincible, like together we could weather anything. I never saw the storm brewing on the horizon. The cracks started small, barely noticeable, like hairline fractures in glass. After the boys were born, I threw myself into work to secure our future, trusting Sue to keep the home fires burning. But something shifted after her surgeries. It wasn't just the physical transformation. It was like she'd shed more than skin. She began to crave attention in ways that didn't include me, and her eyes sparkled with a confidence I'd never seen before. At first, I admired it, thinking she'd found a part of herself she'd lost. Then came the late nights, the cryptic texts, and the growing distance between us. I told myself it was just a phase, that every marriage went through rough patches. But deep down, I knew better. The fairy tale I'd cherished had become a house of cards, and Sue was pulling out the foundation one piece at a time. I was desperate to hold it together, for the boys, for the life we'd built, but it was clear she wasn't. And the most painful part? She didn't even try to hide it. I used to admire the way Sue could light up a room, but now that light felt cold and blinding. After her surgeries, it was like she'd been reborn, not just in appearance, but in attitude. She carried herself differently, her confidence sharp enough to cut. At first, I supported her changes, thinking they'd bring us closer. Instead, they seemed to push her further away. She no longer wanted quiet evenings or family weekends. Her world became one of parties, new friends, and secrets. The woman I'd fallen in love with was still there, but she was buried beneath layers of ambition and self-interest I didn't recognize. Then came the betrayals, one after another, like cracks spreading across a windshield. It started with small things, missed dinners, dismissive comments, but soon escalated into outright disregard for our marriage. The first time I suspected an affair, I confronted her. She laughed, brushing me off as paranoid. But her laughter didn't hide the truth. It mocked me, daring me to prove what I already knew. And then she crossed a line I never thought possible, bringing Leroy, her lover, into our home. The audacity of it left me reeling, as if I'd been hit by a truck I saw coming but couldn't avoid. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but what was the point? She didn't care about the damage she was doing. Not to me, not to the boys, not to the life we'd built together. She flaunted Leroy like a trophy, and I was expected to sit silently and accept it. But I didn't. Not really. Beneath the hurt and humiliation, something was building inside me. Something she couldn't see. She thought she'd broken me, but all she'd done was light the fuse. It was a scene burned into my memory. Sue and Leroy, bold as brass, sitting at our kitchen table. The laughter between them was loud, carefree, as if they were in their own little world. And maybe they were, but that world was built on the ashes of mine. I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest burned, not just with anger, but with a deep, gnawing ache. This wasn't just betrayal, it was mockery. And when Sue finally turned to look at me, her expression wasn't guilt or shame. It was defiance. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Later that night, after the boys were in bed, I confronted her. I laid everything out. Her lies, her manipulation, the damage she'd done. Her response? A shrug, a dismissive wave of her hand, as if I were a minor inconvenience in her grand plans. "You knew what this was," she said, her tone colder than I thought possible. It was a statement, not a conversation. She had no intention of fixing anything, no desire to apologize. In that moment, I realized that I was alone in this fight. Sue had already moved on, emotionally and otherwise. That was when I reached out to Bull. It wasn't an easy call to make, but I didn't see another option. Bull had been a friend once, a rough-around-the-edges kind of guy who always knew how to handle a problem. He listened as I spilled my story, his silence heavy on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, almost clinical. "I'll help you," he said, "but you need to be ready for what comes next." And though I didn't fully understand what that meant, I knew one thing. I couldn't stay where I was. Meeting Bull again after all these years felt like stepping back into a shadowy version of my past. He hadn't changed much. Same gruff demeanor, same calculating stare that seemed to pierce through you. But there was a weight to him now, a sense of someone who'd seen too much and survived anyway. When I told him everything, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You sure you want to go down this road?" he finally asked. His voice was steady, almost detached, like he'd already sized up the situation and the risks involved. I didn't hesitate. I don't see any other way. Bull's plan was unconventional, to say the least. He wasn't just talking about exposing Sue's infidelity. He wanted to dismantle the web she and Leroy had woven. Drugs, money, connections to people who operated far outside the law. It was all there waiting to be unraveled. The idea of bringing federal attention into my home was terrifying, but Bull made it clear this was about more than personal revenge. It was about protecting my boys from the fallout and ensuring Sue couldn't keep spinning her lies unchecked. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something far bigger than I'd anticipated. As we talked, Bull laid out the details with surgical precision. Bugs in the house, surveillance, careful timing. He thought of everything. And while I appreciated his thoroughness, I couldn't ignore the moral line we were about to cross. This wasn't just a fight for my family anymore. It was a battle in a much darker arena. There's no turning back after this, Bull warned, his gaze sharp. I nodded, even as a knot of unease twisted in my gut. For better or worse, I was all in. The night of the operation, the air in the house felt charged, like the moments before a storm. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock seemed amplified. I sat in the living room, pretending to read, while Sue and Leroy argued in the kitchen. Their voices rose and fell, filled with tension I couldn't quite place. I wasn't supposed to know what was coming, but I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Somewhere out there, Bull was coordinating everything, the pieces of his plan falling into place. All I had to do was wait. When the raid came, it was chaos. Flashing lights lit up the windows, and heavy boots thundered through the halls. Sue's scream cut through the commotion, followed by Leroy's furious shouts. I stayed where I was, my hands trembling as I clutched the armrest of my chair. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was an unmasking. The authorities moved quickly, seizing everything, drugs, weapons, evidence I didn't even know existed. Sue's face, pale and stunned, was etched with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Leroy's bravado evaporated as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. It was over before I could even process it. But as the house emptied out and the dust began to settle, I realized this was just the beginning. Sue's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was criminal. And now, with the evidence laid bare, she'd have to answer for everything she'd done. I should have felt victorious, but all I could feel was an uneasy sense of what came next. Bull's words echoed in my mind. There's no turning back. And for the first time, I truly understood what he meant. Watching Sue in that courtroom felt surreal. The woman who once commanded attention with her charm now sat slumped, eyes darting nervously between the judge and her lawyer. The evidence was overwhelming, far beyond her infidelity. Drugs, stolen funds, ties to dangerous people. It all painted a picture of someone I barely recognized. As her charges were read out loud, I could see the walls closing in on her. She glanced at me once, her expression pleading, but I didn't move. This was her doing, and for once, I wasn't going to rescue her. Her lawyer spun tales of misunderstanding, desperation, and regret, but no amount of smooth talk could erase the truth. The jury saw through it, just as I had. Every lie she'd told, every betrayal, was laid bare. Leroy didn't even bother showing up to support her. He cut his losses and disappeared into the shadows. She was left alone to face the consequences of the empire she'd tried to build. And while a part of me felt vindicated, another part wrestled with the weight of it all. This was still the mother of my children. After all, and no matter how much she'd hurt me, seeing her fall was bittersweet. The judge handed down her sentence with an air of finality that echoed through the room. Sue's face crumpled, her confidence finally giving way to the reality she'd created. As the bailiff led her away, I stayed rooted in my seat, my mind a whirlwind of relief and sorrow. This chapter was closing, but the story wasn't over. There were still questions to answer, battles to fight, and a future to rebuild. And though I didn't know what lay ahead, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the same man who'd let her walk all over me. Not anymore. After everything, the house felt too quiet. The echoes of Sue's chaos had faded, leaving behind a strange calm I hadn't known in years. It was just me and the boys now. They were confused, hurt, but resilient in ways I hadn't expected. I threw myself into being the father they needed, swapping late night, strategizing with Bull for bedtime stories and weekend hikes. Slowly, the cracks Sue had left in our family began to mend. The boys laughed more, slept better, and started asking questions that didn't revolve around Leroy or why Mom wasn't coming home. It was a fragile kind of peace, but it was ours. Winning custody wasn't easy. Sue's lawyers fought tooth and nail to paint me as an unfit parent, grasping at straws to discredit me. But the evidence of her choices was undeniable. The judge saw through the facade, and for the first time, I felt like the system had worked in my favor. It wasn't just about protecting my sons from Sue's recklessness. It was about giving them a life where they didn't have to walk on eggshells. They deserved stability, love, and a father who would move mountains for them. And I was determined to give them that, no matter the cost. Sometimes, I'd catch myself reflecting on how far we'd come. I wasn't just rebuilding a home. I was rebuilding myself. The man Sue had broken down no longer existed. In his place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that even the deepest wounds could heal with time. The boys were my motivation, my compass, and every small victory felt like a step toward the life we deserved. And though the scars of betrayal still lingered, they were just that, scars, proof that we'd survived and grown beyond the pain. In the stillness of my new life, I've had plenty of time to think about loyalty, what it means and what it costs. Sue's betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't the only one. Leroy's supposed loyalty to her crumbled the moment things got tough, leaving her to face the consequences alone. It's ironic, really, how the people who demand the most allegiance are often the quickest to abandon ship. Watching their world collapse was a strange mix of vindication and sadness. It didn't bring me joy, but it brought closure. And that was enough. Bull stayed true to his word, though his methods left me with questions I'll probably never have answers to. He's not a hero, not by a long shot, but in his own way, he delivered justice. It wasn't the kind you read about in fairy tales, but it was effective. Sometimes when I see his name flash across my phone, I wonder what his price was for helping me. Bull doesn't do favors out of kindness, and I can't shake the feeling that one day he'll come collecting. For now, though, I'll take the peace he helped me find and hope it doesn't come with too heavy a cost. As for me, I'm moving forward. The boys are thriving, and I've rediscovered parts of myself I thought were lost forever. Loyalty and justice. They're messy, complicated, and rarely look the way you expect. But I've learned to trust my instincts, to value the people who truly stand by me, and to find strength in the chaos. Sue may be gone, and Leroy may be just another bad memory, but their betrayal taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life. There's nothing more powerful than reclaiming your own story.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.